Gracious God, give us arms willing enough and hearts wide enough to embrace the child that is God in our heart. Amen. Please be seated. So, our lectionary readings continue to take us on a spiritual journey through specifically our wisdom tradition of our faith. Our wisdom tradition that would have been very familiar to the first century church. Those earliest folks are looking back at what they do know. The wisdom tradition of the ancient Hebrews is brought to us in a few different texts, including what we've heard from today in the Old Testament reading of the Song of Solomon. Then we have in Mark, our earliest gospel, this reflection that sort of brings us into what is it that is being understood as secret, something that needs to be really understood deeply and to be instructed deeply before it can be truly known. That's the engagement that the wisdom tradition invites us to in coming to know God, to coming to have a much deeper and more intimate relationship with this creator being, and in the Christian faith with Jesus. In the Song of Solomon, we hear what it is to be encounter people who are not really understanding or working out of a sense that relationship with one another is how we work out our relationship with God. And in fact, the Hebrews were encountering all kinds of different faith traditions and cultures as they're coming in to the Canaan area. And also, they're encountering Greek traditions as well. So our reference to Hades comes from an Epicurean philosophy that some held, that influenced from the Greek world, and a belief that it didn't matter how we acted in this world. We should enjoy everything we've got in front of us because there's nothing that follows. I think we still have some folks who live that way today, who seem to think that using up all of Earth's resources is okay, because somehow the second coming and the new creation will make it all right. Really? When we have such small creatures as bees collapsing in full colonies, that is the canary in our ecological coal mine, asking for us to pay attention to that. Creation, as we have it, teaches us in the wisdom tradition so much about God's generosity and the deep interdependence of all life on that generosity and on one another's generosity. That's a piece of stewardship, and you'll hear me continue to talk about that theme this fall especially, but all year round as we kick off a brand new committee, year-round stewardship. It's about all the blessing we have all the time and what we do with our many, many blessings. Back to wisdom. Another way that folks who have the wrong ideas are kind of categorized, some of the wrong thinking that we get, is a belief that somehow the Messiah, the person who represents God, however we imagine that as prophet or on and on, is going to claim about themselves that they are a child of God, that God is their father, and that out of that relationship, says the wrong thinkers, then God will save God's child. And so we can torture this messenger, and God will intervene. Let's do that. Let's do that. All right, now Mark. We have Jesus doing the same wisdom teaching. It's exactly this. He is teaching the wrong thinking that he's countering against. And his teaching is this idea that the Messiah, which they've recognized prior to this reading, when it comes to us in Mark, Peter has said, we recognize you as the Messiah. And they've had a mountaintop experience of revelation. And they're still kind of arguing around what does this mean. Because everything they know up to that point about what the Messiah looks like, about what the child of God looks like, the righteous man looks like, is this person's going to come down with thunder and great power, intervene and squash all their enemies, etc., and so forth. We've heard that in previous readings. And now again he's teaching them, actually that's not what's going to happen to the Son of Man, the righteous man, the Messiah. As the wisdom tradition teaches, this person will be handed over to death, and they will die. So that in itself is challenging enough to the understanding they're bringing to this conversation for his apostles. And then he goes on and says, and then after being killed, this righteous man will rise again. So we've talked about this before. Looney Tunes. A little bit, wow, that's not a teaching we've had before. Any of this understanding informed by the wisdom tradition is not. So here's another piece. As he's asking them and teaching them, did they get it? Did they get it? Did they get it? And they're traveling to Capernaum. And on that route, they're still not quite getting it, and they're asking each other, who's the greatest? Who's the greatest? It's very important in that tradition and culture to understand who's sort of the primary inheritor of Jesus' teachings. Who's his right-hand guy? And he's just taught them. Not only does this apply to the Messiah, it applies to all who follow me. That you will not be elevated. You will be despised. When you critique culture and society and economics and politics, which he did, you're not going to be well liked. And yet that's what you're called to do. To work on behalf of those who do not have. So here they are arguing about this. He knows it. He's probably heard a little bit. He's challenging them when they get to Capernaum. A reminder for us is that Peter's house is in Capernaum. You can go and see what is identified potentially as that house, as ruins today. So here we have this gathering. This child then is involved. If this is happening in Capernaum, if it's happening in Peter's house, it's a relative. Now, a sociocultural context for you. Children under the Roman culture influence of which they lived were not considered to be true people until they reached maturity. Now, anybody under the age of 13 has not reached maturity, usually coming to age between 13 and 15. Now, our kids are downstairs, so I can't ask them if they qualify. But they can non-beings socially. They are owned by their father. They're not even owned by their mother. The father can dispose of them as property in creating political alliances, giving them away to live in someone else's household. Now, isn't it interesting that the way that we receive the reading, Jesus says, it says he took a child and put it in an old room. It. And embraced it. Well, that gets to the idea of how it doesn't have a lot of value. But when we go to the Greek, it's feminine. It's a little girl that he puts in the middle of the room and embraces a little girl. Now, children are basically equated to the level of slaves socially. A girl child is even lower in estimation and value than a boy child. In that cultural context, girl children are not worth very much. They cost a lot. You have to endow them with dowries just to get them out of their house. It's the boy children that are going to bring economic influence into your kinship group. It's the boy children that are going to help forge those stronger alliances and make sure that your business keeps going through an extended kinship family. So he takes the least of the least of the least and puts this being in the middle of the room and says, this is the person who's first. Now, first of all, imagine being the apostle sitting around saying, what? What? Ick? Ew? What? This non-being, and it's female. And then he does one more step and embraces her and says, because what you do to her, you do to me. What? You're equating yourself with the least of the least of the least, and it's female. Wow. You want us to embrace that? I don't think so. As they're struggling with this image, culturally and socially, imagine what a little girl is experiencing. Perhaps for the first time, even being acknowledged in a group of adults, and powerful ones at that. Economic businessmen, potentially rabbis, people who have authority in their culture. And she's being told by the most important person in the room that she's more important than he is. That's empowerment. Giving value to those whose society and culture find valueless. Finding those people, putting them in the center, and saying, this is who we serve. This is where our orientation needs to be as a society and culture and followers of God, helping this person. That's how we become great. When we look at one another, the invitation is to understand that behind each of these apparent masks that make us look different and seem different, there is a child of God. A child of God that very much longs to be seen, to be valued, to be recognized, to be embraced. And the God that calls us to incarnate compassion and grace calls us to hold that child in one another. When we look at a face next to us, in front of us, around us, there is God. When we see someone homeless on a street corner, or even trying to live in a little alley by our church, when we see our elders, when we see people who we'd rather not encounter, there's the invitation to value the child of God that longs to be embraced by us. That's where we are called to be, to encounter more deeply in the wisdom